I am Ken Hamilton with Biominerals Technologies, and I'd like to welcome you to our educational series of Food for Life presentations. This overview is pertaining to our protein sources and foods that we eat and how they are affecting our health or causing disease. What we are beginning to share here is a result of 16 years worth of trials and testing and the last 5 years of intense study and research. This will be a brief presentation of concepts, and all of these will be discussed in much greater detail as we get into the full body of the presentations. So I'd suggest strap in, cowboy up, because we are going for an unbelievable ride here. Thank you for joining us. Our company focuses on regenerative agricultural practices with soils, crops, livestock that affect human nutrition. We are a consulting company. We provide products, research, and development for improving food systems. We work with all kinds of crops all over the United States, livestock, and we understand that what is produced in the soil that becomes a plant affects the nutritional components for everything that consumes these foods. And our focus is on looking at cause and effect, what we do in the beginning and how it ends up. Health results from food with superior nutrition that support the intelligent genetic design of your body and metabolic system. Disease comes from poor quality foods that destroy the cellular structure, genetic design, and metabolic systems within the body. Our purpose is to introduce you to a new kind of meat, omega-balanced natural meats, that of cattle, bison, lamb, and soon-to-be poultry and pork. This is a new way of growing meat to maximize nutrition, animal health, feed efficiency, producing the highest quality of meat that is non-oxidative and non-inflammatory when eaten. Yet it provides the highest nutrient quality, extremely flavorful, and very tender. Our approach is all natural, and it is based on what these animals are genetically and metabolically designed to eat. Our focus is to use grasses and forages that will provide the livestock with the highest nutrient components for the animal's health and growth, but to produce a superior end product in the marketplace. We use no vaccines, no antibiotics, no hormones, and no grain or seed oils ever. With our healthy grasses and forages, we use a complete and full spectrum of natural organic minerals with a proprietary blend of organic food-grade fermentation microbes to maximize the nutrition to our animals. Meat today is sold on identity labels: grass-fed versus grain-fed, natural versus organic, feedlot or pasture, Angus, Wagyu, bison or beef, prime, choice, drugs, vaccines, hormones, antibiotics. All of these tend to be identifying factors of the meat, but they completely leave out all aspects of nutrition and health. With the focus on identity labels and not on quality and nutritional components, consumers have very little information, and we are and have been uninformed about what we were purchasing and consuming. Currently, with regards to beef, there are several choices in this market. The first one is grass-fed, which is considered to be the healthier of the two options. The second one is grain-fed or feedlot beef. This is a much larger market, whereas 97% of the meat in our grocery stores is from feedlots. It's grain-fed. These two markets exist to address customer demands. Grass-fed is the healthier perceived option,
but it is lean, it has less flavor, and it is tougher due to the length of time it takes to produce an animal, typically 2.5 to 3 years. Feedlot beef addresses the flavor because they can produce more fat and they can finish them sooner, approximately 2 years. This is quicker than grass-fed, so you have a more tender meat end product. But neither the grass-fed or the feedlot can accomplish all three market demands and do it correctly. Only now is there a product called Omega Balance Natural Beef that accomplishes all three market demands, that of health, that of flavor, and that of tenderness. And our approach produces a superior result to both that of grass-fed and feedlot beef. When referring to organic grass-fed, grass-finished, there shouldn't be much of a toxin level in this meat. However, you're still limited because you have less flavor and it's going to be tough. Because there's no standard in grass-fed, vaccinations and antibiotics can be used. And that ties into the drug toxicity that we see in feedlot or grain-fed animals. There is also the grass-fed and grain-finished approach, and that ties into the complete toxicity profile that comes from a feedlot operation when you grain finish an animal. The major complaints that we hear on grass-fed is the lack of flavor and the lack of tenderness. While the feedlot or grain-fed approach has improved on flavor and tenderness, the method of feeding utilizes primarily genetically engineered crops. These are GMO type plants, and through gene insertion, the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats become altered. That means they're differently constructed than they would be in a normal or conventional plant. Each of these genetically engineered plants have specific traits that they're engineered for. Two of these traits are the Bt toxin, which is an insecticide, and the other one is resistance to glyphosate, a potent herbicide. The Bt toxin comes from the Bacillus thuringiensis microorganism that produces an insecticide naturally. The gene was removed from that microbe, put into the corn plant or soybean plant, so that it then produces its own insecticide. The problem is when we consume that corn or that soybean, that gene then flows from the plant into our gut microflora, and then we begin producing our own internal insecticide. Glyphosate is a patented antimicrobial, which means it kills beneficial microorganisms as little as 1/2 of 1 part per million in concentration, yet it stimulates pathogens. And it takes a great deal more glyphosate to kill pathogens than it does to kill beneficials, which results in a massive shift in biological populations in the rumen. So, for example, we're going to look at Enterococcus faecalis versus Clostridium botulinum with glyphosate and without glyphosate. Glyphosate is also patented as a mineral chelator. So those minerals and nutrients within our food sources will be tied up and not available. The loss of beneficial microbes and increasing pathogenic microbes in the gut that produce toxins, along with the loss of minerals, destroys our immune system. And that increases the need for antibiotics. 70 to 80% of our immune systems are run by the microflora, the beneficial microbes in our gut. This work by Dr. Monica Kruger, the effects of glyphosate on Enterococcus faecalis versus Clostridium botulinum. And you can see that without glyphosate, we have a high presence of Enterococcus faecalis, which are beneficial microbes in the gut. With glyphosate, we have a suppressed presence of Enterococcus faecalis and a very elevated level of Clostridium botulinum, and the botulism neurotoxins that are produced by these microbes then begin to damage cell tissue, both in the gut, in the bloodstream, and in the neurological systems. The rumen from a healthy animal without glyphosate as part of the feed is dramatically different than the rumen from a diseased animal with chronic botulism. As these pathogens produce these cellular toxins and neurotoxins, this further destroys the health properties of not only our cells, but our biological systems. It damages our cell membranes, the nucleus of our cells, and our mitochondria, and both are dysfunctional. So you have an increased experience of neurological disorders. We have the depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. By destroying the intestinal tract with these toxic components from these pathogenic microbes, we are now destroying our digestive system, and this allows a lot of toxic components to get into the bloodstream that should not be there. This feed analysis on corn, GMO corn versus non-GMO corn, was done by a national and international food company in the United States. This was evaluating the mineral, nutrition, and energy components of the two types of corn. Our first section, our major nutrients, talks about our phosphate, potassium, calcium, magnesium type elements that are found in GMO corn versus non-GMO corn. Also, the available energy as one compared to another. When plants are genetically modified, they do not construct the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins as they normally would. This is interrupted. And so the follow-through with nutrients and nutrient components are not there. You can see the comparison between the two categories. Energy availability, 100 versus 340,000. That's a massive difference. Bricks, 1 versus 20. You look at the calcium, parts per million, 14 versus 6,130. That's a massive, massive shift in nutrient availability. In slide 2, secondary trace elements. Now, these are absolutely critical for enzyme function and metabolic processes. The GMO corn has far less of these components available. And third, the toxic components. This is one of the 4 categories of toxicity that come from feedlot operations. Chemical content, 60 versus 0. Now this will be herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, and pesticides. One of the most alarming that we found was formaldehyde content at 200 parts per million in GMO corn versus 0 in non-GMO corn. It is then moved into the animal and into the meat, which we later consume. You look at glyphosate content, 13 parts per million in GMO plants versus 0 in non-GMO plants. And again, we covered glyphosate toxicity. Not only that, to alter beneficial gut microflora to pathogens, but also to chelate the mineral content in our nutrients and stop them from becoming available to us or our livestock. The second category of toxicity is drug toxicity. And because of the glyphosate toxicity and the massive shifting from beneficial to pathogenic microorganisms in the gut, the antibiotic use in feedlot situations is increased dramatically to try to prevent sickness and disease. The livestock sector uses 7 times more antibiotics than the human population does. We have additional toxicity from implants and hormone injections, and these pass through into the food supply, just as antibiotics do. You have your routine vaccinations, and now the new mRNA gene therapy vaccinations, of which the cattle associations have vowed to make available as soon as possible. The additional category of toxicity are chemicals. We have a wide range of herbicides, glyphosate, glufosinate, 2,4-D, dicamba, paraquat. All of these are agricultural chemicals that are used widely on crop production. In addition, you have fungicides, insecticides, and pesticides. All of these chemicals are destructive and disease promoting because they are part of food production. They end up in the food sources of our livestock, and those chemical byproducts end up in the food components that we consume. The last major category is metabolic toxicity. These are from oxidizing omega-6s. When we analyze the grains, the corn, the soy, the wheat, the barley, that these livestock are fed, we learn that the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is extremely imbalanced. There are elevated omega-6s to the extent of 20, 30, nearly 40 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. Our cells and our livestock cells were all genetically designed to run and operate correctly on an omega-6 to omega-3 balance of 1-to-1. When we or our livestock consume a diet with excessive omega-6s in relation to omega-3s, we have cellular oxidation and inflammation. Omega-6 essential fatty acids are highly oxidizing acids. Omega-3 essential fatty acids are antioxidation. So nature puts them in balance. The reason grass-fed is considered healthy is because it has a very balanced or close omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, typically 2 to 3 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. However, feedlot, grain-fed animals have much higher omega-6 to omega-3 ratios, often 8, 10, 15, 20, 25, even 30 or more omega-6s to 1 omega-3. There are simply not enough antioxidants to deal with the oxidation potential and damage within our cells. And this creates a whole range of toxic metabolic byproducts. The feedlot or grain-fed approach produces a combination of at least these 4 toxic categories of poisons, all of which should never be in your body and are highly disease-promoting. The omega-balanced natural beef begins with using the same types of forages as grass-fed, but we have a completely different outcome as grass-fed and feedlot grain-fed beef. The process is we use a proprietary, specialized fermentation process with microbes and minerals. By following this program, we accomplish the health benefits of the best essential fatty acid omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 1-to-1. We have improved flavors because we produce very high grades of meat, which are prime and choice. Our meat is very tender because it requires much less time to produce an animal to finish weight. Our process maximizes feed efficiency. We have a higher nutritional component that ends up in the meat. We have a higher energy. And our practices and products all qualify as organic.
Let's go back and look at the major shifts over the last 150 years regarding meat. We have gone from grazing, grass-fed and finished, to feedlot, which is grain-fed In 1917, the USDA began voluntary grading. By 1927, the grading began to appear on meat packaging. By 1935, only 5% of beef produced came from feedlots. But with the introduction of antibiotics in the mid-1940s, there was a big shift into feedlots and packing houses at that time, with lower grain prices into the 50s. By the early 60s, 66% of beef were produced from grain-fed operations. And now, as of 2012, 10 years ago, 97% of the beef in grocery stores come from feedlot operations. Feedlot beef is loaded with inflammatory seed oils. These are highly oxidative and inflammatory. Yet it's what we find in all of our supermarkets. Producing omega-balanced natural meats is based on the concept of fermented forages, grasses, and legumes with no grains, no seed oils ever. Because of the fermentation and the increased production of nutrients within the feed, our animals absorb and grow faster with a higher quality of meat content. This produces this incredibly healthy ratio of 1-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, which completely supports our cellular health, function, structure, and provides the right energy. Because our feed provides the nutrition and extra energy, our animals are able to produce the extra fat, marbling, and grow faster, which produces all of the qualities within our meat. Let's look at omega-balanced natural beef to grocery store meat cuts. In 2019, we compared burger, steaks, and roast, where the same cuts type of meat from the grocery store was 6-to-1, 5-to-1, and 11-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, where the omega-balanced natural beef was scarcely over 1 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. This omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is very important because at about a threshold of 2.5 omega-6 to 1 omega-3, you begin to see the expression of degenerative diseases coming into the human family. To understand how these protein sources are getting such high omega-6 to omega-3 ratios, you have to look at their food sources. Corn, GMO, non-GMO, ranges anywhere from 25 to 35 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. Barley, wheat, oats can be 15 omega-6s to 1 omega-3 or higher. When animals are fed these feed sources, these oils end up in the end product. While we test our meats continuously, this is an interesting study. In 2021, we took our omega-balanced natural beef and we went into a regional grocery store and we bought grass-fed and we bought Wagyu beef. As you can see, the omega-balanced natural beef came in with less omega-6s than omega-3s. The grass-fed, which was honestly grass-fed, came in at about 1.34 to 1. Yet the Wagyu came in at 6.63 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. When you look at these cuts, the grass-fed was a New York cut. It probably had a standard grading, yet it cost $24.99 a pound. The Wagyu was a prime grade. It had been fed a tremendous amount of grain to get this type of marbling, and it cost $34.99 a pound. While the Wagyu has a much higher grading and appearance of quality, it is a much poorer choice of meat. So why does any of this matter? Well, let's go back in history. Let's go back to the 1900s and let's take the 5 top killers in history then compared to today. Pneumonia or influenza, tuberculosis, gastrointestinal infections, heart valvular disease, versus now, heart disease, cancer, drugs, medical error, chronic respiratory diseases, cerebrovascular diseases. What we've done is we have traded infectious diseases for degenerative diseases. So let's look at why. Well, there's been 4 major shifts in the American diet, and Dr. Chris Kenobi details this exceptionally well. We've changed from saturated fats to seed oils, from whole grain flours to refined flours, the introduction of hydrogenated seed oils, and a massive increase in sugar consumption. And all of these are major components of processed foods. More than meat, it's what you eat. Going back historically, all of our meats were natural, and our other foods were whole foods. We had very little chronic disease. Looking at the last 80 years, our meats are now unnatural, they're industrialized, and we're headed towards cell culture and synthetic biology produced proteins. Our other foods are now much lower quality in mineral and nutrient content. They're highly processed. Most of them come from genetically engineered plants, and we're moving towards a cell-cultured precision fermentation. These are all highly disease-promoting foods. Historically, our diets of our ancestors were 96% whole foods with saturated animal fats and very little sugar. Currently, our diet is down to 29% real whole food. 32% of our diet consists of vegetable oils, 21% sugar, and refined wheat at 17% with about 1% trans fats. So we've had a major shift in the way our ancestors ate to the way we eat today. A major shift has been from saturated animal fats to vegetable oils or seed oils. Now, vegetables don't produce oils. I believe it's a marketing ploy to give consumers the concept that seed oils are healthy. And what we're going to discover is they are not. Sugar consumption in the 1700s was 4 pounds per person. By 2010, we were at 150 pounds per person. Both excessive sugar intake and excessive omega-6 essential fatty acids are damaging to your health. However, it's the oxidative properties of the excessive omega-6 essential fatty acids that promote far more cellular damage and mitochondrial dysfunction, resulting in metabolic syndrome. Historically, the human diet evolved with a ratio of 1:1, 1 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. And traditional diets around the world still maintain that ratio without our influence. And the threshold of disease begins at about 2.5 omega-6 to 1 omega-3. Currently, the typical Western diet contains 20 to 25 omega-6s to 1 omega-3. And this excessive consumption promotes cardiovascular disease, cancers, inflammation and autoimmune disease, neurological disease, insulin resistance, obesity, and diabetes. These essential fatty acids are biological, structural, and play functional roles within every cell. They are signaling molecules, and they are constituents of our cellular membranes. They allow for permeability and transport through the membranes. And again, they must come from our diet. Historically, for the last 5,900 years, our ancestors consumed natural whole foods with meats, either from the ocean or grass-grazing animals. And that provided a natural balance of this 1-to-1 ratio, which is ideal not only for humans, but for healthy livestock. Now, instead of consuming animals from natural systems, such as oceans and land grazing, we consume animals from feedlots, confined animal feeding operations, and they're fed completely different forages and food sources than they would get naturally. Because of that, our omega-6 to omega-3 ratio has massively increased. The balance here is absolutely crucial. Let me take just a moment and explain. Omega-6s are oxidative, which means that they break down, and omega-3s are antioxidative. Now, in the shortest, briefest sense, our cells all use omega-6s and omega-3s. These are essential fatty acids. Why? Because our bodies do not make them. They must come from our diet, and we have to have them. And so consuming them is our only option. And our body, our molecular design, our genetic design, is that we have these in ratio because we have something that oxidizes and something that is antioxidant. So you have an offset, you have a balance. And omega-6s play an important, crucial, healthy, vital role in cellular structure and function, as do omega-3s. But when in excess, omega-6s begin the oxidization process that we cannot keep up with the antioxidants in our foods any longer. And our bodies do not have the detoxification, the antioxidant capacity to detoxify this high level of omega-6s. And this is like the all-time coolest video in this presentation. You look at what is happening in relation to a cell's structural system, the membrane, and also its functional system in the mitochondria when it is composed of excess omega-6 essential fatty acids. These are oxidative, they're breaking down, and the structures are literally falling apart. Like, this is the coolest video ever to try to get this point across on what is happening to our cellular structures with excessive omega-6s. So these are our choices. Natural, whole food the way God made it. Nothing added, nothing taken out, and it's grown without chemicals. It's meant to be nutritious, and it's non-inflammatory. Our current processed, pasteurized, toxic, genetically engineered food sources, the nutrition elements have been removed and changed. There's a lot of toxic chemicals that are added and preservatives. It's highly oxidative from the omega-6 levels, and it's very dangerous to our health. And these cultured genetics in these plants produce toxic compounds in our food. It's just a result of genetic engineering. In the future, this synthetic biology, cell-cultured, precision fermentation, man-made, fake food, if you will, it will be highly toxic. It will have DNA mutations that transfer into us. It will be grown with cancerous cell lines. It'll not be safe for consumption or cosmetics. It's grown in large steel tanks. It's genetically engineered microorganisms that will create these compounds. And we don't even know what most of them are, nor are they natural, and they're completely untested. And that's going to be in our food supply. And this is all going to create a severely high level of toxic byproducts from unnatural processes. And you cannot remove all of this from the end product of cultured food. As I mentioned from the beginning and throughout the presentation here, that we're going to look at a lot of things in depth. And this is meant to be an overview or a concept piece to introduce you to the incredible meat products that we produce, but also how everything works around us. So we're going to look at the introduction of all these concepts, which are going to include the laws of nature in the process of creation. We're going to look into much more depth in our omega balanced natural meats and beef, what it is and what sources of healthy fats and proteins that are produced within this. Also, health versus disease. What is making us sick today? We're going to look at our cells and our mitochondria energy production in depth, because this is really the core of what goes on in our cells and what goes south. Is when we damage that mitochondria, we lose the ability to convert that energy. And once we have mitochondria dysfunction, we have damaged that command center of that cell. And that is going to begin this endless cascade of degenerative diseases. We want to look at DNA discovery and damage. We're going to talk about our immune systems and how they work. We're going to go into depth on cholesterol, and we're going to find out that cholesterol is not the boogeyman that the medical complex wants to make us out to think. And what effects our toxic food is having on our liver, how fructose inhibits mitochondria function. And as we look at all of these things, what we're trying to present is a very comprehensive approach on why we're sick and how to avoid it. The whole solution to this is going back to very healthy, whole, natural foods and getting protein sources that have the right balance of omega-3s and omega-6s. And this is not going to come from the industrial food complex, not through the feedlot systems, and absolutely, emphatically not through the processed food companies. And so we're going to have to go back to individual growers, grassroots organizations, producers and consumers that work together to produce these kind of foods. But by stepping out of the industrial food complexes, it puts us back into a food system that promotes health, so we can get out of this degenerative disease cycle that is supported by the medical complex. So, with all that said, everything that we've learned in the last 50 years has greatly added to our knowledge and understanding of how our body's metabolism and our cellular systems function and work. And we hope to demonstrate that better health is achievable, and sicknesses and diseases are really a result of our metabolic systems being destroyed by our food choices. And this can all be corrected. And so please join me. This is a very passionate and exciting journey. It's fun and it's enlightening, it's inspiring and it's motivating. But it's time to take control of our health again. So for now, this is Ken Hamilton with Biominerals Technologies. Let there be light.